Your resume these days is almost the last step once the conversations have already started.
Really?
Start with your LinkedIn. That is
Okay.
your modern digital resume and the representation of your career.
Welcome to Promoted with Denise Harris, the podcast where ambitious professionals come to hear impactful conversations, game-changing tips, and learn the strategies that drive career advancement and help you get promoted. I'm your host, Denise Harris. Now, women are increasingly successful using recruiting firms to land senior roles, though they remain underrepresented in leadership positions overall. An interesting stat is that women are 18% more likely than men to be hired when applying for senior roles through recruiters. Today, our guest is Debbie Wissel, president of Swing Search, which is a recruiting firm that specializes in finding top performers for high-growth startups. Debbie entered the world of recruiting and leadership search in 2020 as a career pivot and after a decade leading product and client services at some of New York City's most celebrated fintech startups, including LearnVest and Ellevest. Debbie's experience in these early stage startups gave her a front row seat to the highs and lows of startup growth, the importance of choosing the right leaders, and a deep empathy for founders and the team that is brought together to make it all happen. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you so much, Denise. I'm honored to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to see you, and thank you so much for joining us here at the podcast.
Yeah, congratulations. I've been listening to the episodes and I'm happy to be a part of the promoted community.
Thank you so much. Well, let's go ahead and jump in, Debbie. I have so many things I want to talk to you about today. Let's start by maybe you telling us a little bit about what sets Swing Search apart from other recruitment firms and why you specialize in startup leadership.
Sure. So there are many recruitment firms out there. I, of course, am biased and think Swing Search is the best.
Of course.
We are specialized in high growth and really early stage startups. Early stage startups need a different kind of talent than the typical company. They really need go-getters and leaders that are ready to roll up their sleeves. And we say a lot in our industry, GSD, get blank done, get stuff done.
Okay.
Startups at their very nature are trying to disrupt markets. They're bringing new products to market, or they're creating new markets entirely. So the founders and investors who support them are looking for builders and doers that are really up for that challenge. Swing Search is also a little bit different in that there's a lot of recruiting firms that focus on executive search and a lot of recruiting firms that focus on, say, sales team build-outs or customer success team build-outs. Swing Search does do those two things, but what we're best known for in the startup and investor community is that like VP level director talent, which I love because they are waiting for the right career opportunity. They're the cuspers who are excited for that next challenge that will launch their career.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because when you started at Swing Search, you were doing a lot of the recruiting components and you yourself got promoted to president of the company, right?
Well, Denise, one of the takeaways I want your promoted community to have is to always take the call. Because my path to Swing Search was quite serendipitous. And it started with a recruiting call in that, some people on this, in the promoted community are going to be inundated by recruiters. And then, of course, you don't want to take every call. You want to be selective with your time and understand which recruiter has an expertise or a specialty in the area I'm interested in where the call would be worthwhile. But because most jobs are not found through recruiters, many people aren't inundated by recruiter emails. So when you do get one, look up the recruiter, look up the company, and I would highly encourage you to take the call. This happened with me with Swing Search. I was happy as could be in my job when Swing Search called me for one of their clients. And the role they were looking for, I knew I wasn't ready to move on from where I was, but the role did sound interesting and kind of perfect on paper. And Annie Wenzel, a partner at Swing Search, who I now work very closely with, her emails were so engaging that I just thought, let me take the call. And even though I'm not interested, maybe someone in my network would be, because it was a very New York City specific role. And, as soon as she started to describe the role, I had clarity that I did not want it, But man, I have always loved the hiring aspect of my jobs, because one of the many benefits of working at a startup is that you get to flex in so many different areas. So even though I was never a head of talent or a head of people, I got to hire up to 50 people at LearnVest when we were building the sales and customer success team, all the way to just 3 or 4 people at other startups I worked at. So I knew I always loved the talent hiring side of things. And the conversation quickly changed. And I was like, I want to know what you do for a living. And honestly, 3 months later, I joined Swing Search, first as the VP of Growth and Partnerships, and now as president.
That is so interesting because, as you said, it wasn't what you thought it was initially, but it evolved into being a great fit for you.
A fabulous fit, and one that I was ready for. And I only knew that I was ready for it because of another one of Swing Search's partners, Jenny Smith. She calls it career maintenance. You know, I had a strong understanding of what would make it worthwhile to move for. You know, and that's not just a salary stat. It has to do with team and market and work life and how you work and what you're working on. And I had a strong sense for that. So even though it was completely different than a venture-backed startup, it hit so many of the other categories that it's like, oh, maybe we should explore this further.
Yeah, it sounds like you were taking a holistic approach to making that move. A holistic approach just meaning that you were considering everything. As you said earlier, the fit, the opportunity, the team, that you considered everything, like how it would impact you.
Oh, 100%. So often, and I think I'm seeing a real change here, but so often the conversation is about work and then life. And hello, they are one and the same thing. You know, like work is a part of life.
That's right.
And so I have a thriving family at home. I am ambitious in my whole life, not just my career life.
Right.
So of course they all need to fit together.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. Debbie, can you talk a little bit about what are some key advantages of actually working with a recruitment firm as a job seeker, and particularly for leadership roles?
Yeah. When a recruitment firm contacts you for a leadership role, you suddenly have a partner and a coach in that process. You've got someone who day in and day out talks with high potential, high functioning achievers in your industry.
Yeah.
So you have so many benchmarks and things to learn from that conversation with the recruiter. But more than anything, the recruiter is there to help represent you and advocate for you. And if the conversations continue, even negotiate on your behalf. If we are thoughtful about our career decisions and make the right ones, we don't switch jobs all that often.
Yeah.
You know, even if you do something 5 to 10 times in your life, it's only 5 to 10 times in your life.
Right.
And yet a recruiter does this day in and day out. So they can really be your partner and your expert on things like negotiation, interview preparation and readiness, things like that.
Yeah, I love that. At what point do you think someone should really consider enlisting the help of a recruitment firm? And from your perspective, like, are there specific milestones or transitions where it's most beneficial?
Yeah, I mean, this is where there's some misunderstandings about the industry, because a recruitment firm is really working for the client that has retained them to work on a search. And we are only called for the hard stuff. You know, they've probably explored every other avenue possible before a founder will call Swing Search and say, I need your help. The reason why I want to clarify that is that rarely are you in a situation where if you're on a job hunt, you can contact a recruiter and then they're going to find a job on your behalf. Instead, you kind of flip that model upside down, and it's a recruiter is looking for very specific requirements. That's where the word headhunting comes from, right? They're looking for very specific requirements for their client. And if you meet them, then great, let's have a conversation. But if you don't, it's never a litmus test or a barometer for your candidacy in general. It's just that there's not a specific role that we're working on right now that is the right match. So it's about timing.
Got it. That's interesting. But what about like when you do get called by a recruiter, are there some steps that an individual, a candidate can take to prepare and stand out during the process? Essentially, what you're saying is that, you know, you don't go to the recruiter. Recruiters go to you. They
Right.
find you, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. So if someone wants to work with a recruiter, they are looking for, an executive leadership position, in your case, in a startup, like, how do I make myself visible? What do I need to do differently so that somebody is going to, to find me, if you will?
I want to answer that question in two parts. One is like, how do I stand out to a recruiter?
Okay.
And the other is, once a recruiter's contacted me, how do I make the most of that conversation and stand out in that conversation?
Okay.
In terms of how do I stand out so I can even be on a recruiter's radar, I would do two things. Most immediately, go and refresh your LinkedIn. Okay. Make sure that your LinkedIn is optimized for all the things that they suggest you to be optimized for, and have specifics in there, because LinkedIn really is the tool of our craft. And if there's no information there, then we have little information to work off of. I also just want to clarify here that so often I hear active candidates say, I know I'm going to get my head in the game for the job search once I have my resume ready. Wrong answer. Your resume these days is almost the last step once the conversations have already started.
Really?
Start with your LinkedIn. That is your modern digital resume and the representation of your career. So, two things if you want to stand out. One is get your LinkedIn ready. And two is understand what recruitment firms work in the industry or the function that you want to be in or you want to grow in. Recruitment is a very crowded market, so there are many agencies out there. And if you can find the ones that match kind of your interests, start building relationships there. Not with just any recruitment firm, that's not going to be a great use of time. But if you are especially interested in having a leadership role in a startup, Swing Search is the right firm to get to know. So at the very least, inbound us. We may not have the right role for what you're looking for at the time, but we'll have your interest, your candidacy, and that'll be accessible to our team of 40 people when they're working on roles for our clients.
So it sounds like it's really like a matchmaking process. Right?
Oh,
matching the role, matching the candidate to the right position, which can take some time.
Modern day matchmaking for careers. I know. I think everyone on our team would love to do it for love interests later on. We're all just kind of like, we're matchmakers at heart. And it really is that, because it's not just the skill set and the experience, but also the chemistry.
Yeah.
Especially at leadership roles, one of the most fundamental things you need to make it work is trust.
Yeah, trust is so essential in just about everything we do in our lives. Now, what signals or challenges do startups face that lead them to seek your services for finding leadership roles?
Oh, how long do we have? I think it's important to start off by acknowledging that being a venture-backed startup is one of the very hardest ways to grow a company. If most companies are hoping to grow 5 to 15, maybe even 30%, that would be amazing growth kind of year over year. Venture-backed startups are looking to double or triple year over year for the first 5 years, and then some more. It is, for a lack of a better analogy in my mind right now, pouring gasoline on a fire.
Wow.
It's not a cute little campfire.
Yeah, that sounds explosive. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there's a tremendous amount of challenges for the founder in that. They need to find a team that is up for that pace and that kind of speed of growth and tackling challenges and moving on to the next one. And they really need to put the right team in place. And remember, these aren't an early stage startup, at least. It's not a 200-person company where if you make your 201st hire the wrong hire, well, it's in a larger pool of people, so we can recover. With startups, you are one of 20 hires or one of 12 hires. So if you're representing 8% of the team and you're the wrong hire, there's a lot at stake.
Right.
So there's a lot of challenges that startups face in leading them to need the help of recruiters, not the least of which is founders are so busy. I have so much empathy for founders. They are trying to do so much, disrupt markets, be accountable to their investors, raise capital, and also hire. And hiring the right person is, in any study that you look at, one of their top areas of concerns, often because they don't have the time to do it well and to do it right. They don't have access to the quality they need. They don't have an understanding of the role that they're even trying to hire for. and they may not have the network that gets them to what they need for the role.
Yeah. And I imagine that it's especially critical when the organization is growing really, really fast, right? I mean, you're always putting fires out and you really need to find the right people, to help. You can't grow without good, solid bench.
That's right. And one of the areas where we spend a lot of time with our founders is getting really clear on what type of person you need in a role given the stage that you're at. Because a director of marketing at a Series A company that's in the process of trying to find product market fit and scale their go-to-market is very different than the person that you need at a pre-IPO company where you've got product market fit and now you need to scale. Those are two really different people. And so getting really clear on what stage are you at and what do you really need this person to be doing. One of the more common mistakes we see is that because there's so much to do, a founder might think that they need to bring in an executive to help, when really they actually need two doers to get stuff done so that the founder can delegate and tackle the big strategy issues.
That really sounds like an insider look to the matching the candidate to the organization. But are there some specific factors that weigh more heavily than others in those decisions? And particularly in today's environment where a lot of organizations, are remote, right? Mm-hmm. And so they may not necessarily have to hire somebody who is here in the US. They may be outside of the US, right? I mean, because it could be a remote position. But are there any particular factors that weigh more heavily when the startup executive makes a decision that, yes, this is the candidate that they want? Is it experience, background, all the things?
Yeah, no, we definitely see some really common denominators. And I should clarify that the majority of Swing Search's work is in go-to-market. So marketing, sales, product, things that directly touch revenue. So when we are recruiting, we are often looking for someone who's got past experience with a similar sales motion or a similar buyer. So they understand the market and what it takes to sell in that market. Even if they're not doing the direct sale, they understand the landscape of the industry the company's operating in. That's really important. Taking someone from B2B SaaS and putting them in a health tech company that sells directly to hospitals is like a totally different learning curve than if you already come in knowing how to sell into hospitals. So that's a big thing, experience with the sales motion and the buyer.
Are there any things that companies are prioritizing though when they hire for these leadership positions? Anything specific? I mean, I know you talked about background and experience, but just curious if startups that are, focused on high growth, are there any sort of priorities that they're looking for when they hire in these leadership positions? Because it's a startup, right? I mean, and so I wonder if there's a little bit more flexibility in the candidates that they hire, or are they very, very set on specific criteria? Because it's a bit different than hiring for corporate roles.
Yeah. Honestly, Denise, I would say it all depends.
Okay.
And it depends for a good reason, because an executive really needs to complement the team that they're entering. And so the team dynamic that exists is also going to dictate what they need from a new team member. Okay. And what skill sets they need to balance out.
Okay.
The common themes for startup hiring are most certainly someone who is a doer, who has a growth mindset. And what I mean by that is you may have done this role in 2 other startups that were successful. That's great. You've got a playbook and an understanding of what needs to happen, but you're also learning and listening for how that playbook might not be completely appropriate for this role.
Yeah. And
you're okay testing and challenging and listening and learning along the way so that you refine it for exactly what that company needs.
Yeah.
There's and the article is now almost 10 years old, but First Round Review wrote an article on giving away your Legos about how your job at a startup or any high growth company is going to change maybe every 6 months. And for some people, that will be so destabilizing that it's not going to be the right environment for them.
Yeah.
But for others, that's going to be awesome. Look how much exposure you get if your job's changing every 6 months.
Yeah.
And so I share that because it's not a sign of mismanagement when that happens at a startup. It's a sign of growth.
Yeah.
And you need to be self-aware to know whether that sounds exciting and adrenaline filled and sign me up, or if it sounds dreadful.
Yeah.
That's okay. Don't waste your time trying to find a job at a startup if it sounds dreadful.
I think that's pretty clear. So you're looking at hundreds of LinkedIn profiles that you're culling through. What qualities make someone not only qualified for a leadership role, but also a standout candidate in the eyes of the clients who you serve?
Because we are serving high growth companies, we've got a high bias towards people who have excelled in those environments before.
Okay.
And understand the chaos. We see a lot of career switchers. But if you are coming from an environment where your job was steady and consistent and you needed to follow the same playbook kind of quarter over quarter, year over year, you're going to have even more to prove and articulate that you won't be in shock in this new environment.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at a background, we look at whether someone has been in an environment, whether it's a specific job or a life circumstance where they've needed to roll with the punches and overcome adversity, that they would be well suited for that. And of course, just like with any company, they're looking for like intellectual rigor and examples of where they've achieved high bars before. That still very much is a reality, is kind of what other environments have you been in that you've needed to demonstrate high intellect and high kind of productivity.
Yeah. Debbie, how important is it to develop a network? It sounds like, as you said, recruiters are looking through these LinkedIn profiles and, matching candidates to the role. But what about in terms of developing a network, knowing people, being able to have these exploration calls? Does that matter that your network is deep, or not so much in this area?
I would say it matters the most.
Okay.
And the reason why is that while our conversation has really focused on working with a recruitment firm, 99% or more of jobs are not filled through a recruitment agency. They're filled through good networking and good research. So by no means do I want promoted listeners to walk away thinking, oh God, I got to find a recruiter to talk to. No, the real way you find a job is to build your network. And that sounds so amorphous and big, but really to start, it's a matter of, who in your life would you be proud to call a coworker?
Yeah.
Who in your life would you be proud to work for or have someone report into you? And have coffee with that person. Ask them for a quick 20-minute Zoom catch up. Because the reality is that many jobs are not posted. And the jobs that are posted, maybe they haven't been taken down. Maybe they're posted for optics. Like, you just never know. And so a good job search is very time intensive, and it has to do with your network.
Yeah, no, I think that's a common theme in many of the guests who come on to the show, and everyone talks about the importance of really developing these deep relationships and, developing networks, both internally and externally as well. So I'm curious about one thing, and I hope you don't mind me asking, but I know a lot of people who have been ghosted by recruiters. I mean, they're talking to a recruiter and everything seems to be going really well. And then, I don't know, you don't hear anything. Is that true, or why does that happen?
Yeah. Oh, first of all, I'm sorry on behalf of all of those people and candidates.
Apologies accepted.
One of the greatest challenges in growing swing search is overcoming the behavior of other bad recruiters out there, because we really are different. And our team does amazing work, but there's a lot of, I would say it's especially contingency recruiters where they're only paid if they fill the role. So if suddenly you're not going to be the one who fills the role, they really have no incentive to build that relationship.
Okay.
That is not an indicator of the quality of your candidacy or awesomeness. It's literally a salesperson following the money.
Yeah.
With retained search, there's many different payment models, but swing search, we don't do contingent recruiting. So it is in our best interest to really build relationships over time. I would say though, Denise, that if people are being ghosted, don't let it affect your confidence. And it's literally that your candidacy isn't the exact right match for the role and they've moved on, but it doesn't mean that they never want to talk again.
Yeah, that's true. Just keep going.
Keep going.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't read into it.
Right. Don't take it personally.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So what advice would you give to women in particular who are looking to move into leadership roles in startups or other industries? Is there anything that you think women should be paying attention to in particular?
You know, some of the themes that have come up in this conversation that high growth companies look for are like doers, learners, growth mindset, player coach, high functioning, can multitask. And these are traits that I see in really every woman I know. Like we are good at those things. We are, I'll just stereotype for a second. We are damn good at those things.
we do it every day, right? I mean, it's kind of part of our, our MO.
Whether you are managing the household or working outside of the home, like you do it every day, whether you realize it or not. And so I think my biggest piece of advice is don't underestimate yourself. And I say this because the energy you put out there is often the energy that you're going to get back. And so if you are in a position of, because I came into this industry for mission-oriented reasons, like careers play such outsized roles in our lives. So I want to help match people with the right careers.
Yeah.
So often I'm talking to women who are entering the workforce again after maybe a pause for family reasons. And there's almost an apology. If it's not stated, it's in their vibe. And we got to get rid of that. You likely left and took a pause for all of the right life reasons, no apology. And you're going to get back in there with confidence. So that's what I would want the most, is just like the confidence for women to not underestimate themselves.
Yeah. I think you got to own it. I mean, whatever happens in life, it happens, but everything that happens for a reason. And oftentimes that really makes you greater. It's like a mosaic, right? A big puzzle, like all the different things that happen to us, good, bad, and indifferent, really add to our character and who we are. And instead of diminishing some of the negative things that happen, the things that don't necessarily go our way, I believe that we should just own it. I mean, there's no failure. It's really just about learning. In fact, scientists have a different word for mistakes. They never say something was a mistake. They say it's data, right? I mean, it's simply intel to use. It's data. Yeah. So I think when women are re-entering the workforce or they're thinking about making a change, things aren't necessarily going right in the positions where they currently are, and they want to do something different. It's really about just owning it and betting on yourself and just saying, hey, if this didn't work, okay, let me try something different. If that doesn't work, I'll keep trying something different. Like, it's not about just staying where you are and just accepting your circumstances. It's really about taking the bull by the horns and making the difference in your career and cultivating it the way that you want it to be. I work with many clients and I always ask them, like, what do you want? And it's a very tough question. It sounds like it's an easy one, but it really isn't, because oftentimes people just don't know what they want. And when you're not clear about the destination, you can end up going anywhere versus really just sitting down and defining what makes you happy. Where do I want to spend 8 to 10 hours a day? What do I want to do that feels good for me? And so I think, really being able to take inventory of your life, defining what your goals are, but also knowing your values, integrity, freedom, honesty, whatever it may be, and aligning that with the work you do. I myself built a business. It'll be 9 years for me, as an executive coach, leadership development consultancy. I built a business around my strengths, around the things that I love doing each and every day. And yeah, there's always going to be some ups and downs, but I would not trade it for anything in the world, because every morning I wake up, I'm filled with gratitude because I get to do what I love to do, which is help women go further in their careers and be better than they ever thought they could be. And that is extraordinarily rewarding.
Yeah, beautifully said.
Yeah.
You make it sound easy. It's not easy, right? Yeah. There are tough days. It can be hard to sustain that energy of confidence to know that it will work out, but it is perseverance and keeping going.
Yeah, I agree, Debbie. And it isn't easy, but it's worth it.
Yeah,
it's worth it.
In you mentioning that, one really powerful question that someone I really respect asked me when I was trying to make a career decision, and it felt so hard. There were actually 3 paths in front of me. I did not know which one to choose. And the person asked, "What does Debbie Wissel want? Like, what does your life success look like?" And for someone who has always prioritized my career, that question was so powerful, because I realized that actually what I really want is a healthy, lasting marriage. I want to be there with my kids. I want to be a good partner in life, and not just in my job. And suddenly that put my career into perspective. A career is a tool so that I can achieve those other things. And for me, that was incredibly powerful, because it's what I needed to kind of put those little demons in my head in place of like what I actually really want from a job.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is so true. Well, I really appreciate this conversation. I have one more question that I'm curious, though. From your perspective, what are 3 qualities or characteristics that you think make someone promotable?
I have the answer that immediately comes to mind. And the answer is easy, because we, as a Swing Search team, we're reflecting on where we want to put our areas of focus for 2025. What are our key themes that are going to make sure we're using everyone's time well? What makes someone promotable, I think, is impact. Do you have a meaningful impact on the organization in what you were asked to do? Are you producing work that's high quality and quality you're proud of? And do you have an ownership mentality? That ownership mentality, I think, is especially important. And it's an easy trait. Well, it's a required trait to have in startups, is that feeling of ownership. But I think it's easy for that feeling to kind of get buried in larger companies where you feel less close to the immediate impact. But if you can still embody that ownership, it will serve you well in getting promoted.
So very well said. Well, thank you so much, Debbie, for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. I know the listeners have enjoyed learning some pro tips from you, and we're grateful that you came through and spent some time with us today. So thank you for being on the Promoted with Denise Harris podcast.
Thank you, Denise. I am so honored to be among one of the early guests, because I've listened to the podcast so far and you've got some powerhouses. I am honored to be among that group. But I will say, we are about to end this podcast and you haven't asked me about one of your favorite things.
Oh, thank you for the reminder. You reading any good books?
Yeah, thank you. That's it. So the book that I think has had a lasting impact on me is Daniel Coyle's The Culture Code. It's not a recent book I read, but it's a book I return to over and over again. He wrote The Talent Code and he wrote The Culture Code, and I think both of those are very good.
The Culture Code by Daniel
Coyle.
Okay. Yeah. We'll definitely include it in the show notes. But what's 1 or 2 things that you love about that book? I haven't heard about that one, so what am I missing?
The culture code really focuses on like the patterns of highly successful groups. And he's got a great chapter in there, for example, on data patterns of communication for people who work within visual distance of each other. And he found that chatter and communication is exponentially higher if you are in sitting view of someone. But if you are one floor away, if they move engineering away from product and now one's on the 5th floor and one's on the 4th floor, communication decreases at a rate in which they actually may as well be in another country.
Really?
Yeah, it's a really, really great book. And it's been out there for a while, but I think it stands the test of time.
Okay, I will absolutely pick it up. Well, thank you again, Debbie, for coming on to the Promoted with Denise Harris podcast. And thank you to the listeners for joining us today. Please listen, share, and leave a review on the Promoted with Denise Harris podcast. And I will see you during the next episode.